What does it take to teach a robot to pick an apple? Let's find out. Hello, you're listening to Where What If Becomes What's Next from Carnegie Mellon University, where we're exploring what AI means to industries, government, society, and you. On this episode, we're looking at how artificial intelligence and robotics, including drones, are transforming agriculture, one apple at a time. And we'll be talking with some of the experts who are leading this change. Since farming began, innovation and technology have periodically transformed agriculture. More than 8,000 years ago, ancient civilizations in Egypt invented the concept of irrigation, when they diverted water from the Nile to enable farmers to grow crops from otherwise dry fields. Fast forward to the Industrial Revolution, when inventions such as the cotton gin, reaper, and steam engine transformed farming by automating tasks and making farms way more productive. Today, agriculture is harvesting AI technology to help farmers solve some of the world's biggest problems. AI technologies are helping agriculture produce a more steady supply of food for a hungry world by monitoring crop health, soil conditions, and weather patterns, so that farmers can optimize the yield from their crops while conserving scarce resources such as water. AI is protecting the environment when robots identify weeds and then eliminate them one at a time, a precision that dramatically reduces broader usage of potentially harmful chemicals and herbicides. AI-powered self-driving tractors and robots are performing tasks such as watering, spraying, and harvesting crops to help farmers grow food from fields that might otherwise go untended. Drones equipped with high-resolution cameras are monitoring crops for real-time signs of disease and pest infestations, thereby securing the safety of food for generations to come. Across the USA and around the planet, AI is quickly becoming the newest tool in the farmer's toolshed.
One of the things that is very commonly used all over the world is farmers have a cell phone. They see a plant with a problem or they see an insect they haven't identified before, and they can take a picture of it and have an AI tool that automatically identifies the problem and recommends some solutions, what chemical to apply or whatever to deal with that problem. So that's an example of a very accessible form of AI. Everybody in the world, almost everybody in the world has cell phones, even in underdeveloped countries.
We're speaking with George Cantor, a research professor in the Robotics Institute at Carnegie Mellon University. George, let's step back for a minute. Why is AI being embraced so readily by agriculture?
There are two big challenges in the field. Agriculture generally has a lot of challenges, but I kind of focus on two. And so the first one is this 2050 problem. So there are going to be about 10 billion people in the world by the year 2050. And the rate at which our yields are increasing is not high enough to meet that need. So that's the first one. I call that the feed the world problem. The second one, and this is specific to the US, most of the more developed world, which is there is a pretty big labor shortage when it comes to agriculture. And so in areas like California, whose economy has a large component of specialty crops, which are grapes and apples and these things we like to have to eat, they just can't get workers. And, the rate they're paying has gone up and they still are having trouble getting workers. And a lot of the growers I talk to feel like we're facing this existential crisis where if we don't solve the labor availability problem in the next 5 to 10 years, that we are going to be importing those kinds of products, fruits, specialty crops, instead of growing them domestically.
Okay, so how is AI part of the solution?
So I think on the feed the world problem, the biggest way to have impact is through plant breeding. And in plant breeding, the current bottleneck is the step in the breeding pipeline where you actually plant the plants in the ground and evaluate how they're doing. So breeders are looking for specific traits. They have a lot of information about the genetics of the plant and the past performance of the plant, and they've got to go through and measure the traits they care about. So these are things like height and color and number of leaves, and depending on the plant, it could be things like disease resistance or quality of the fruit or taste of the fruit. And so we can use robotics to help with that evaluation step. And as a result, we can help the breeders accelerate the progress they're making toward improving crops. The reason I think that this is the biggest way we can impact the feed the world problem is that the output of that is the breeders have created a new plant. And that plant can be put into existing production systems without changing fundamentally how the crops are grown and just yield more or be more resistant to drought or disease or whatever the challenge is.
And how will AI help fill the labor shortage? Farmers are already using automated technologies and machinery, some of them AI-powered to fill some of the labor gaps.
On the other problem, right, the labor availability problem, this is where we get into the sort of dexterous robots performing tasks in the fields in an automated way that standard agricultural automation techniques have not been able to address. What is not available in the automation space is the kind of human-like intelligence and the ability to carefully manipulate plants, do things like pick apples or prune trees or thin flowers on trees. These are things that require, these fine human dexterity and human decision-making that we have not yet figured out how to put into machines. So that's the direction we're taking on solving the labor availability problem, is that we're developing robots that will someday be able to do these types of tasks in places where it's hard to get human workers right now and current mechanized solutions to automation don't exist.
When AI and robotics help farmers with these two big challenges, will there be benefits to the environment as well?
The big one is over-application of nitrogen and pesticides, and those run off into the environment and cause all kinds of problems. So I think that the AI tools we're looking at can mitigate those challenges. As an example, we are working with our partners at Iowa State. They have developed a sensor that measures the amount of nitrogen being taken into a plant. It's a little needle probe that you stick in the stalk of a corn plant. And it tells you how much nitrogen the plant is getting. And if it's not getting enough, you can add more nitrogen. And if it's getting too much, you just don't do anything. So with this project, we can use robots to go around and stick these probes into corn stalks and get an estimate of how the plants are doing with respect to nitrogen. And if they're not doing well, then there's an opportunity to go in and apply fertilizer where it's needed. And this gets you toward the idea of applying exactly what's needed and not more and not less. And if you can do that, then it's a win-win because the farmer is going to make more money. They're going to spend less on pesticides. The environment is going to benefit because you're not going to have the kind of runoff events where the nitrogen winds up in the Mississippi River and gets dumped down in the Gulf of Mexico.
We're talking about how AI is helping to revolutionize agriculture. And when we come back, we're going to learn more about robots and nitrogen sensing and what it takes to teach a robot how to pick an apple.
This podcast is brought to you by Carnegie Mellon University. Located in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, CMU is a private, international research university, consistently ranked among the top universities in the world. Its trailblazing research is focused on creating, defining, and accelerating the future of artificial intelligence. For more information, please visit ai.cmu.edu.
Welcome back. You're listening to Where What If Becomes What's Next from Carnegie Mellon University. Earlier, we talked about how AI can help solve agriculture's two biggest challenges. Now we're going to dig a little deeper on how nitrogen-sensing robots can help farms become more profitable and productive while protecting the environment. We're speaking with Pat Schnabel, a distinguished professor at Iowa State University and director of its Plant Sciences Institute. Pat is a co-founder of an ag tech startup, Ingenious Ag, where he is partnering with CMU on the nitrogen sensing project.
So the idea here is that nitrogen is, for most corn, the most expensive input that farmers have. And it's not just corn, but all crops essentially are fertilized with nitrogen. but it's an expensive input. And if you apply too little, the crop doesn't yield to its optimal. And if you apply too much, you're wasting the cost of the input, and you also add nitrogen to the environment, which is not a good thing. So it's a real win if we can apply just the right amount of nitrogen. We have a sensor now that we can stab a corn plant and determine how much nitrogen is in the plant. And this is a good readout of whether the plant needs more nitrogen or has sufficient nitrogen or even too much nitrogen, well before we see any symptoms on the plant itself.
That's amazing. But I understand that an acre of corn could have 30,000 to 40,000 plants. Would you have to apply your sensors into all of them?
Fortunately, we don't need to sample every plant. We can sample some plants in one part of the field and move a little bit further across the field. And if we're getting the same results, we can go further away and sample more. So we can be sensible about this. And we're working with CMU on this. They have robotics where they can send a robot through the field and it will stab the plants and put the sensor in them. And that's a huge advantage. That means we don't have to have as many people walking around in fields. And labor is a huge problem in agriculture. And bending over in the hot sun is not actually the best part of agriculture for most people.
What do these robots look like? I have this science fiction image of robots walking through a cornfield like the baseball players in Field of Dreams.
No, they're not at all like that. They're not two-legged robots or even those robotic dogs. These are wheeled robots. So it looks like a cart, a motorized cart, maybe a go-kart kind of a thing that is remotely or maybe even autonomously controlled as it moves through the field. It has to identify the plant to sense, has to grab the plant, has to insert the sensor into the plant, and then move on to the next plant. So it's actually a fairly complicated operation. But once the robots are developed and trained to do this, it's going to be a huge labor saving.
And while these robots are going through a field, could they perform other tasks or collect other data that would be helpful to farmers?
Yes. This is the very beginning. In fact, part of the Institute, there are people in the group developing insect identification tools. So as the robot goes through the field, it's taking images and identifying this is an insect versus not an insect. And then beyond that, what insect is this? Is this an insect that is a pest of the crop? Or is it a beneficial insect? Or is it just somebody who happens to be there but has no impact on the crop? And of course, you could do this once you've got a robot moving through the field. As you say, there's a lot of other information you can gather if you wish. I mean, you can look at water status. You can look at stand counts. This is something that's important, is how many plants are there in the field? You can come up with accurate numbers, and that's useful for decision making.
Now I'm seeing a whole fleet of robots moving through a cornfield.
Yes, I think that's probably the case. There are also challenges when you have a fleet of robots. You need to coordinate their action. And that's an interesting challenge for George Cantor, who's the lead at CMU that we work with, is you have to coordinate these things so that they're all aware of what the other ones are doing, and you're optimizing the movement of the whole group or fleet of robots.
So back to you, George. Getting a robot to take sensor readings of nitrogen is tricky enough. And it gets even more complicated when you have lots of robots all working in the same field. Perhaps it all comes down to how we began this podcast. What does it take to get a robot to pick an apple?
So to pick an apple, or frankly do any other agricultural task, there's three components that we need to solve. The first one is mobility. So these machines have to be able to get around in the fields, get from place to place, get to where they need to be to do the task. The second one is perception. And that involves looking at the situation around the robot and understanding what's happening there. And so if you're out there to pick apples, that would be like detecting where the apples are and detecting whether they're ripe and ready to harvest. And then the third part of the solution is what we call manipulation. So this is what people typically think of as robotics, right? These are the mechanisms that actually act in the world and do things like reach out into a tree and grab an apple and pull it off the tree.
Abhi Silwal is a senior project scientist at CMU's Robotics Institute and works alongside George on robotics projects in agriculture. Abhi, you might have applied some of the principles for harvesting an apple to a similar agricultural task, pruning a grapevine.
In a broad way, whenever it comes to doing these kind of advanced capabilities, in robotics we usually say we sense, we plan, and then we act. So the sensing part is that you know where the fruit is. The planning part is how the robot is going to go from point A to point B to essentially go and grasp that fruit. And then the execution part or the act plan is to pluck it out of the tree and put it somewhere else. But pruning is another task that is much more sophisticated than that. There are very specific rules that viticulturists have come up with that needs to be followed or respected by the robot. So that's where we've seen a lot of interest these days in terms of how machine learning can be used to learn that kind of pruning rule directly from human beings, so that whatever a human being does versus what a robot does, there aren't any discrepancies there.
Okay, I understand why it's valuable to have robots help with harvesting and pruning, especially when the weather is dangerous to workers. But why else should we bring robots into viticulture and fruit harvesting?
The other aspect of it has to do with, I would say, economic sustainability, that harvesting and pruning are very critical parts of the crop production cycle. For example, one grower in California told me that if they make errors, and if that error is less than 5% in determining if the apple is ripe or not for taking it to the market, if there are above 5% error in margin, they lose money. So these are very, very time-critical tasks that needs to be done very consistently. So both consistency as well as for economic sustainability.
Terry Bates is the director of the Cornell Lake Erie Research and Extension Lab and a senior research associate at Cornell School of Integrated Plant Sciences. Terry is also the director of the Efficient Vineyard Project, which, since it was founded in 2005, is now helping more than 1,000 farmers nationwide increase their vineyard yield and grape quality using new technologies.
Currently, we're working with Carnegie Mellon on a robotic pruner. A lot of what happens in viticulture is it's about the quantity and quality of fruiting buds that you leave for next year. And there's a whole science behind that. So we're kind of addressing that in three phases. Can the robot do the whole job? Can we assist the robot? Or can we do most of the job and the robot just comes in and cleans up and does the fine tuning of the pruning practice? So where AI comes in on that is to be able to identify the appropriate buds that we want to retain that is going to provide the fruit for next year. So that's, I think, where the AI modeling is actually way above my head. We help them train the robot, but I don't know how they do it.
As you look into the future, 5 or 10 years out, what's next for AI in farming?
So we have a handful of growers that are adopting some of this technology in our region. And we had that LO roundtable discussion at our winter conference last year. And every single one of them said, once you start using this technology, the first question is, what else can it do? They just get hooked on it and they see the possibilities. And I just don't think that we've scratched the surface yet.
Abhi, will consumers benefit in the future too?
When we can sustainably grow food to feed the current generation and the future, I think that would ultimately could potentially bring the prices of crop production down. That would translate to the consumers being able to afford foods at lower prices. When you can think about sustainability from environmental impact standpoint of view, where we are spraying less chemicals to grow food, that would mean foods that are less tainted with chemicals.
Pat, your thoughts?
I think this is going to be a major driver of change in U.S. agriculture. One of the advantages U.S. farmers have globally is they are early adopters of technology. Now, there are a lot of technologies that are being touted to farmers these days, some of which the economics are somewhat dubious. But once we have technologies out there that help farmers improve yields, increase profitability, preserve the sustainability, they will be adopted. So I'm quite confident that some of these technologies, these AI-driven technologies, are going to be an important part of U.S. agriculture going forward. I would talk about climate change just a little bit. There was debate, a decade ago, but it's pretty much a given that climate is changing. And it's changing in ways that are going to be less predictable. And so we need to come up with new technologies to help ensure a continual, reliable supply of food. And I believe AI and robotics are going to be a big part of that. I just hope we all work together as a society and a species to make sure that we do the research, deploy the technologies, and get them out to the farmers so that they can do that for us.
Speaking of climate change, George, you're working on some projects that could provide some relief, right?
We have some projects ongoing here in the Robotics Institute where people are looking at using robots, drones, and ground rovers that drive around to plant seedling trees and do reforestation. So I think that has potential to be very impactful because we all know that having lots of trees is a beneficial component when you look at sort of the global warming picture.
And George, in your crystal ball, what do you see?
AI for agriculture, it's going to be a big thing. Like AI is going to be involved in agriculture, period, end of sentence. What that means is we need to be training a new generation of people who can operate in that intersection of, agricultural, plant science knowledge and computer/AI knowledge. Currently, in traditional educational systems, there's a pretty big divide between those two categories. It's rare to find a student who is even aware of the fact that you can have a foot in both camps. So we really need to work hard in the educational institutions to create this new field and to start training people who can both be competent on the agricultural sciences and competent in artificial intelligence. Agricultural systems have evolved over thousands of years, and AI is not going to step in and replace them. AI is going to provide a new set of tools that can work within those systems to improve the productivity.
Thanks to all my guests, and thanks to you for listening. Please check the show notes, where you'll find links to additional resources for this episode. And to learn more or contact us with a story idea or comments, please visit ai.cmu.edu/podcast. If you are enjoying this show, please rate and review us on your favorite podcast site and share with friends. And be sure to subscribe so you'll never miss an episode. You've been listening to Where What If Becomes What's Next from Carnegie Mellon University, where we are exploring what AI means to industries, government, society, and you. Stay tuned and stay curious.